I was holding the deed to my daughter's mountain house when her husband called it a cheap shack. The document was inside a cream envelope beneath my chair. I had planned to hand it to Lauren after the father-daughter dance, along with the brass key her mother carried for 20 years. Then Daniel Price stood beneath the reception lights, raised his champagne glass, and turned my gift into a joke. Robert has been generous enough to give us his old cabin, he told 180 wedding guests. It's not exactly our style, more pine cones than penthouse. People laughed because Daniel laughed first. Lauren did not. She looked down at her plate. Daniel pointed toward a rendering projected behind the band. It showed a glass-walled penthouse above downtown Charlotte, with a rooftop pool and a view priced far beyond what either of them could afford. We'll sell the shack as soon as the deed clears, he said. That gives us the down payment for our real first home. He lifted his glass higher, to trading 20-year-old lumber for 21st century living. More laughter. I looked at the envelope beneath my chair. The deed inside had not been signed, delivered, or recorded. My attorney was holding the original transfer package in escrow until I gave final instructions Monday morning. At 8:19 that night, while Daniel cut the wedding cake, I sent her 6 words. Do not record the deed. Prepare lease. By breakfast the next morning, my daughter still had a place to live. She no longer had a house to sell. My name is Robert Mercer. I was 67 years old when my son-in-law mocked the most personal gift I had ever tried to give. I am a widower, a father, and the owner of Mercer Residential Construction, a company small enough that I still know which employee leaves coffee rings on blueprints. The mountain house stood outside Blowing Rock, North Carolina, on 8 wooded acres above a creek. It was not a shack. It was not a mansion either. When my wife Helen and I bought it in 2003, the roof sagged, the chimney leaned, and raccoons occupied the upstairs bedroom. The original chestnut logs had been covered with fake siding. Rain entered through 6 different places. The bank valued the structure at almost nothing. Helen loved it immediately. She said the house looked tired, not ruined. For 20 years we restored it one room at a time. I stabilized the foundation and rebuilt the stone chimney. Helen stripped paint from the chestnut beams with a heat gun and a patience I never possessed. We installed plumbing that did not freeze, replaced the windows, and reused every soundboard we removed. We did not work continuously. Life interrupted us. My company nearly failed during the housing crash. Lauren needed braces. Helen's mother became ill. Some years we could only afford to repair one door or finish half a bathroom. That was part of what made the house ours. The restoration recorded our marriage better than any photo album. The oak floor came from a school gym my company demolished, and Helen insisted we pull every nail by hand rather than send the boards to a landfill. During the winter of 2010, a storm dropped 3 trees across the private road. Lauren was 16. The power remained out for 5 days, and the 3 of us slept beside the wood stove while I told bad stories by flashlight. Lauren later called it her favorite Christmas. When Helen began chemotherapy, she could no longer climb ladders, but she still supervised from a canvas chair. She drew the kitchen cabinet layout on the back of an oncology appointment schedule. Inside the final cabinet, she wrote the date and added 3 initials, H, R, and L. I never expected Lauren to worship those details. Houses must serve the living, not imprison them. She could repaint rooms, replace appliances, or make the property her own. What I could not imagine was watching her reduce every saved board and family memory to a line on a penthouse funding sheet. Several Mercer construction employees had worked there during slow weeks. When they heard I planned to give the house to Lauren, they assumed she would live there. So did I. Lauren grew up inside the project. She spent school holidays sanding trim and complained that every vacation involved carrying lumber uphill. At 16, she carved her initials beneath the loft stairs. At 24, she hosted her college friends there and finally admitted the place was beautiful. Helen died of pancreatic cancer 5 years before the wedding. During her last summer, she and Lauren sat on the back porch each morning under a quilt. One evening, Helen asked me to promise that the mountain house would remain a place where Lauren could come home. She did not say Lauren must own it. I added that part myself. After Helen's death, the house became difficult for me to visit. Every repair contained her fingerprints. The blue tile in the kitchen was the color she chose after rejecting 7 samples. The brass key hung beside a photograph of her laughing with sawdust in her hair. I began to think transferring the property to Lauren would honor both of them. It would remove maintenance from my shoulders and give my daughter a mortgage-free home worth approximately $520,000. I told Lauren about the gift 8 months before the wedding. She cried and hugged me. Daniel asked how soon the title could be transferred. That should have told me something. Daniel was 35 and worked in commercial leasing. He wore suits that fit perfectly and spoke about property as if every room were waiting to become a transaction. When he first saw the mountain house, he walked through it with his phone raised, photographing the rooms. I assumed he was impressed. Later, I learned the pictures went to a real estate broker. At dinner that weekend, Daniel asked whether the land could be subdivided. I said the steep slope and private road made development impractical. He asked what a cash buyer might pay. Lauren changed the subject. I told myself he was curious because property was his business. My first mistake was believing professional language made personal greed harmless. My second was avoiding a direct conversation with Lauren. I had promised a home. I never asked whether she intended to live there. I never put preservation conditions in writing. I did not explain that Helen's request mattered to me. I expected gratitude to supply all the terms I failed to say aloud. Lauren and Daniel lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte. Their lease cost $2,800 a month. Daniel wanted a penthouse in a new tower called Calder House. The unit had 3 bedrooms, a private elevator, and a terrace larger than my first office. The purchase price was $1.7 million. Their combined income was respectable, but they did not have the required down payment. Daniel had spent most of his savings investing in a restaurant project that closed after 11 months. Lauren had student loans and less than $40,000 in retirement accounts. My mountain house solved their problem. If they sold it for around $500,000, paid closing costs, and added their savings, the bank would consider the penthouse application. Daniel treated that possibility as completed financing before I had signed a single page. He reserved the unit 3 months before the wedding. Calder House required an $85,000 non-refundable deposit because construction was nearly complete, and Daniel wanted the seller to remove the penthouse from the market for 45 days. He paid $40,000 from his savings and borrowed the rest from a business line personally guaranteed against his future commissions. The contract said the deposit would be credited at closing, but forfeited if the buyer failed to obtain financing. Daniel signed it anyway. A month later, my neighbor reported a photographer at the mountain house. Lauren said Daniel needed pictures for an insurance valuation. The explanation made little sense, but the wedding was close and every question became an argument. The photographer worked for Evelyn Cross, a luxury broker. Daniel asked her for a private valuation and a plan to sell without a public listing. She estimated $500,000 to $550,000 if the furniture remained. The furniture had never been part of my gift. Daniel included it anyway. He also asked whether a cash buyer could close within 21 days. Evelyn said yes if the septic records, survey, and road agreement were ready. Daniel began requesting those documents from my office administrator by saying Lauren needed them for estate planning. My administrator copied me on the 3rd request. I called Lauren and asked why a future homeowner needed an expedited survey certification before she owned the property. She said Daniel liked to prepare early. Prepare for what? Everything. I heard discomfort in her voice and chose not to press. I wanted to arrive at the wedding without suspicion between us. That choice gave them 2 more weeks to organize a sale around a gift I had not completed. Evelyn never signed a listing agreement because Lauren lacked title, but she prepared a draft and Daniel placed the expected net proceeds, $491,000, into his private closing spreadsheet. At the top, he wrote, Mercer Cabin Exit. I saw that spreadsheet only after the bank denied the penthouse loan. Lauren knew. I did not. My attorney, Melissa Grant, began preparing the gift transfer 6 weeks before the wedding. She had represented my company for 15 years and handled Helen's estate. Melissa recommended placing the house in a trust rather than transferring it outright. I declined. I said Lauren was 32, responsible, and entitled to make her own decisions. Melissa asked whether I would be comfortable if she sold it the following week. I said she would never do that. The certainty in my voice embarrassed me later. Under North Carolina law, a deed is not a gift merely because a lawyer drafts it. It must be properly executed and delivered with the intent to transfer ownership. Recording protects the transaction and gives public notice, but delivery is the part that matters between the people involved. I had not signed or delivered anything. Melissa prepared the deed, transfer forms, tax documents, and a trust alternative. She kept the originals in escrow. I planned to sign Monday after the wedding when Lauren and Daniel returned from their two-night stay at the resort. The envelope beneath my chair contained only a ceremonial copy of the first page and Helen's brass key. Daniel did not know that. He believed the transfer was already inevitable because Lauren told him it was. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lauren asked me for the house's property tax statement and insurance declaration. She said Daniel wanted to estimate future expenses. I emailed both. She also asked for an appraisal. I sent the one Melissa had ordered for gift tax planning. Those documents went into the Calder House mortgage file. The loan officer received a letter from Lauren stating that she expected to own the mountain property free and clear immediately after her wedding. The bank did not count the house as current collateral, but it treated the anticipated sale proceeds as the source of funds for the penthouse down payment. The approval remained conditional on a recorded deed, a listing agreement, and evidence of enough liquid assets to close if the sale took longer than expected. Daniel had none of those things. He told himself the wedding gift would produce them. The ceremony took place at a lakefront resort near Asheville. Lauren wore Helen's veil. When I saw her at the end of the aisle, I forgot every concern I had carried into the weekend. For that hour, she was simply my daughter. At the reception, I gave a short toast about marriage being a structure built from ordinary repairs. I said grand gestures were less important than showing up when the roof leaked. Daniel followed me. He thanked me for paying for the rehearsal dinner. Then he announced the mountain house. His joke about pine cones and penthouses drew easy laughter. Most guests assumed I approved of the sale. The penthouse rendering had their names printed across the bottom, though no contract had closed. Lauren knew the slide was coming. I could tell because she looked at the screen before Daniel pointed toward it. When he called the house a cheap shack, she did not laugh. She also did not correct him. That silence mattered more than his joke. Daniel could dismiss 20 years of work because he had not lived it. Lauren knew which wall her mother rebuilt after chemotherapy. She knew the brass key was kept beside Helen's photograph. She knew I had offered a home, not a pile of sale proceeds. Still, she let him announce the plan as a certainty. You may think I should have stood up and told everyone the penthouse would never happen. I wanted to. But public embarrassment had already made one man look small that night. I did not need to compete with him. I needed to protect the property before his assumption became my mistake. I left the envelope beneath my chair and walked into the hotel lobby. Melissa was not at the wedding. I texted her first, then called when she replied. She answered from her daughter's soccer tournament. I told her exactly what Daniel had said. Has Lauren already received or signed anything? She asked. No. Did you sign the deed? No. Then there is no transfer to undo. I asked about the trust alternative. Melissa said we could place the property into the Mercer family residence trust, but the filing would take several days. In the meantime, I could withdraw the gift instructions and offer Lauren a written occupancy agreement. I asked for a 12-month rent-free lease. The terms were simple. Lauren and Daniel could occupy the mountain house as their primary or secondary residence for 1 year. Rent would be $1 acknowledged as paid. They could not sell, pledge, sublet, list on vacation rental platforms, or materially alter the structure. Utilities, insurance contributions, and ordinary maintenance would be their responsibility. Any attempt to represent themselves as owners would terminate the agreement. After 12 months, they could sign a market rate lease or leave. Melissa asked whether I wanted a cooling off period before making the change. I looked through the lobby doors. Daniel was cutting the cake with one hand while showing the Calder House rendering to an older couple with the other. I've been cooling off since he said pine cones, I told her. At 8:19, I sent the message withdrawing the deed instructions. Melissa confirmed in writing that the unsigned package would not be executed, delivered, or recorded. She emailed the draft lease the next morning. Then I went back to the reception. Lauren asked where I had been. I said I needed air. Daniel put his arm around me for a photograph. Future penthouse neighbor, he said, although I lived 2 hours away and had never expressed interest in city life. I smiled for the camera. The cream envelope remained under my chair until the father-daughter dance. When the band began the song Helen used to sing while cooking, Lauren started crying. I almost changed my mind. She rested her cheek against my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for the house, Dad." I asked one question. "Were you planning to live there?" She pulled back slightly. "Daniel thinks selling is smarter. What do you think?" She looked past me toward her husband. "I think we need to make decisions together now." That was not an answer, but it was honest enough to end my doubt. I did not give her the envelope. I stayed through dessert, the bouquet toss, and the final song. The caterers were paid. The wedding continued. Nobody knew the gift had changed except Melissa and me. At 10 the next morning, Lauren and Daniel came to my hotel suite expecting to sign the closing papers. The cream envelope sat on the table. Daniel reached for it first. I placed my hand over the flap. "The deed is no longer part of the gift," I said. Lauren's face went still. Daniel laughed because he thought I was responding to the joke. "Robert, come on, that was a toast." It was a financing announcement. He said everyone understood the house was rustic and that calling it a shack was affectionate. I asked whether an affectionate nickname was why he planned to sell it immediately. Lauren told me they had already reserved the penthouse. With whose money? Daniel said that was private. Then my property is private too. I opened the envelope and placed the 12-month lease on the table. Lauren read the first page twice. $1 rent, she asked, for 1 year? And then, you pay market rent or move out. Daniel skipped to the restrictions. He found the clauses prohibiting sales, subletting, financing, and representations of ownership. You can't replace a deed with a lease because your feelings got hurt. There was no delivered deed to replace. There was an intended gift. I changed what I intended to give. He accused me of using property to control my adult daughter. I pointed to the sentence giving them free use for 12 months. Control would be telling you where to live. This gives you a choice without giving you something to liquidate. Lauren asked whether her mother's wishes meant anything. That question struck harder than Daniel's insult. I told her Helen wanted the house to remain a place where she could come home. The lease did exactly that. Mom wanted me to have it. Maybe she did. She did not want Daniel to call it cheap lumber and sell it before the wedding cake was cold. Lauren began to cry. Daniel did not comfort her. He stood by the window calculating. Finally, he asked if I would sign the deed long enough for the bank to close, then let them transfer the house into a trust afterward. That proposal confirmed the gift had become nothing but a bridge loan in his mind. I said no. They left without signing the lease. At noon, Daniel called their mortgage officer and said the transfer had been delayed by a family documentation issue. He asked for a 2-week extension. The lender requested proof that I remained committed to the gift. Daniel sent the ceremonial first page from the wedding envelope. He had photographed it before the reception. The page was clearly marked draft, not for execution, across the bottom. It carried no signature, notary seal, or legal description. The loan officer called Melissa to verify the status because her contact information appeared on the draft. Melissa told the truth. No deed had been signed or delivered. No transfer was pending. I had withdrawn the gift instructions. The bank removed the anticipated sale proceeds from Lauren and Daniel's file. Without those funds, their debt-to-income ratio and cash reserves did not qualify for the penthouse loan. The denial arrived 4 business days after the wedding. Daniel called me at 7:06 that evening. He did not begin with an apology. He said, "You cost us $85,000. I asked who signed the non-refundable contract. He said the deposit made sense when the house was guaranteed. Who guaranteed it? Lauren said you would never back out. I waited. He had no answer that included my name on a promise. For the next 3 days, Daniel tried to replace the missing gift with other money. He asked his employer to advance 2 years of commissions. They refused. He contacted a private lender offering short-term loans at nearly 14% interest, but the lender required real estate collateral Daniel did not own. Then he called my company's controller. Daniel said I had verbally approved a temporary loan from Mercer Construction and asked whether the company could wire $150,000 directly to Calder House. My controller, Denise, had worked for me long enough to verify any family request. She called before sending a dollar. I told her there was no loan. Daniel later claimed he was only asking about possibilities. Denise had saved his voicemail. It said, "Robert already agreed. We just need to move before the seller cancels." That sentence ended any remaining temptation I had to rescue the deposit. Lauren tried a different approach. She asked whether I would lend her the down payment personally, secured by future inheritance from my company. I told her future inheritance was not collateral and my employees' livelihoods were not a substitute for the house she intended to sell. She said I was punishing both of them for Daniel's words. I reminded her the bank letter carried her signature. Calder House gave them 72 hours to prove alternative financing. Two mortgage brokers asked the same question: who owns the property today? The answer remained me. When the deadline passed, Calder House issued a formal default notice. The $85,000 deposit converted from a hopeful number in Daniel's spreadsheet into money he would never see again. Daniel threatened to sue for detrimental reliance. His attorney sent Melissa a letter claiming the couple had committed money based on my clear promise of a gift. Melissa responded with the draft deed, the escrow instructions requiring my final approval, and the absence of delivery. She also included Daniel's wedding toast video in which he described a sale I had never authorized. His attorney did not file a lawsuit. Calder House kept the deposit. The seller had taken the penthouse off the market during a period when two other buyers expressed interest. Daniel asked for mercy, then an installment refund, then permission to assign the contract. The seller refused all three. $40,000 of the loss came from Daniel's savings. $45,000 remained on his business line, accumulating interest. He blamed Lauren. That part did not reach me immediately. I learned it when she came to the mountain house alone 3 weeks later. She called from the porch and asked whether the brass key still worked. I had changed no locks. The house was still hers to use if she accepted the lease. I drove up the next morning. Lauren was sitting at the kitchen table beneath the blue tiles Helen chose. The lease lay in front of her, signed on the final page. Daniel had not signed. I explained that both occupants needed to agree to the restrictions if he planned to stay there. Lauren said he had returned to Charlotte and was sleeping at his brother's apartment. Their marriage was less than a month old. I did not celebrate that. Lauren admitted she knew about the penthouse deposit before the wedding. She had sent the appraisal and tax records to the bank. She had also approved the slide in Daniel's toast. "I told him not to call it a shack," she said, "but you let him announce the sale." She nodded. "I thought once everyone heard the plan you wouldn't embarrass us by saying no." There it was. The public announcement had not been careless enthusiasm. It was pressure. They expected the guests' applause to turn my unfinished gift into an obligation. I asked why she wanted the penthouse. Lauren looked around the kitchen. "I didn't, not really. Daniel said the mountain house kept us tied to your life. He wanted something that proved we were building our own." "By selling what your mother and I built?" She closed her eyes. We sat without speaking for a long time. I had my own part to admit. I offered Lauren a $500,000 property as if love alone would preserve it. I avoided the trust Melissa recommended because conditions felt ungenerous. I confused giving freely with refusing to plan. But poor planning did not require me to complete a bad gift after I understood the intended use. Lauren signed the lease. Daniel signed 2 days later after his attorney explained that the agreement was the only lawful basis for him to occupy the property. They moved into the mountain house for 4 months. Daniel hated it. The internet failed during storms. The nearest coffee shop closed at 6. He complained about the private road, the wood stove, and the sound of the creek at night. He drove to Charlotte 3 days a week and tried to list one bedroom on a short-term rental site to offset fuel costs. The listing violated the lease. My property manager documented it before anyone booked. Melissa sent a notice requiring removal within 48 hours. Daniel called that surveillance. Lauren removed the listing herself. The incident forced them into counseling. Daniel said I was using the house to sabotage the marriage. Lauren finally asked why every version of their future depended on converting somebody else's property into his opportunity. He moved out the following week. They separated before their first anniversary. I did not cause every problem between them. I did remove the money that allowed them to pretend those problems were a shared investment strategy. Lauren remained in the house for the full 12 months. At first, our conversations were limited to practical things. She reported a leaking exterior faucet. I sent the shutoff diagram but did not dispatch an employee. She asked which chimney company we used. I gave her the number and let her schedule the inspection. The distance changed something between us. For the first time, Lauren experienced the house as responsibility rather than value. The well pump needed servicing, gravel washed from the road, and mice found the pantry. One Saturday, I arrived to inspect a crack near the porch footing. Lauren had already dug around it and found a clogged drain directing water toward the foundation. Helen would have been proud. I nearly said so, then realized Lauren did not need every competent act compared to her mother. I simply told her she had diagnosed it correctly. We spent the afternoon installing a new drain line. It was the first day since the wedding when neither of us mentioned Daniel, the deed, or the penthouse. Later, Lauren found the initials inside the kitchen cabinet. She sent me a photograph of H, R, and L beneath the date. I remember this, she wrote. I replied, so do I. That exchange did more for us than any apology offered while anger was fresh. She worked remotely from the loft and began repairing things without calling my company. She replaced a rotted porch board, refinished the kitchen table, and planted herbs in the stone bed Helen built. Sometimes she sent photographs. I responded without turning each project into a lesson. At month 10, I mailed the renewal options. Option 1 was a market rate lease at $2,400 per month, below comparable vacation properties, but sufficient to cover taxes, insurance, reserves, and management. Option 2 was a move-out agreement with 60 days to relocate and no penalty. There was no option 3 labeled Ask Dad Again. Lauren chose to leave. She said the house carried too much history for her to discover who she was while living inside mine. That sentence hurt, but it was more honest than calling the property a shack or a down payment. She rented a small house near Asheville and began paying her own way. If you are deciding whether I took back a gift after giving it, remember the sequence. I never delivered the deed. What I withdrew was an intention formed before I knew the truth. What I still gave was a year of free housing and a chance to choose the house as a home rather than cash. The mountain property now belongs to the Mercer Family Residence Trust. Melissa and I created it 6 weeks after the bank denial. I transferred the deed into the trust and recorded restrictions preventing sale outside the family during my lifetime. After my death, the house will be held for the use of any grandchildren and future descendants, with an independent trustee controlling sales, loans, and long-term rentals. Lauren is a beneficiary, not the owner. Daniel has no interest in it at all. If Lauren has children, they will be able to spend summers beneath the chestnut beams their grandmother restored. If she does not, the trust can allow nieces, nephews, and future Mercer descendants to use it. The property will not become a monument. It will remain a house. Daniel eventually repaid the business line by selling his car and taking extra leasing commissions. He never recovered the $85,000 deposit. Calder House sold the penthouse to another buyer for $50,000, more than Daniel's contract price. Lauren and Daniel divorced 18 months after the wedding. She never asked me to repay the deposit. She did ask whether I enjoyed watching him lose it. I told her the truth. For one evening, I did. Then I watched my daughter grieve a marriage, and the satisfaction became smaller. Revenge can stop someone from taking what is yours. It cannot protect everyone from the consequences of choosing them. The cream envelope from the wedding is still in my desk. Inside it is the ceremonial deed page with draft across the bottom. I removed Helen's brass key and returned it to the hook beside her photograph. Lauren has another key now. It opens the house when the trust schedules family visits. It does not transfer title, secure a loan, or promise ownership. It opens a door. That is what Helen asked me to preserve, a place where our daughter could come home, not a cheap shack, not a penthouse deposit, a home.